Chapter 9. The Human Stain. The body had become a stranger to him. Elias discovered this in the small hours of the morning, when sleep refused to come, and the silence of his apartment pressed against his eardrums like a physical weight. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, and catalogued the ways in which his flesh had betrayed him, the ache in his bones that had become a constant companion, the shortness of breath that made even the simple act of rolling over feel like a marathon, the hollowed-out sensation in his stomach that no amount of food could fill. The cancer was consuming him from the inside. A slow and methodical demolition of everything he had taken for granted, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had stopped the chemotherapy. The decision had been easy, surprisingly easy, a recognition that the treatments were prolonging his suffering without offering any meaningful extension of his life. The doctors had been respectful, had nodded gravely and offered their condolences, and he had felt nothing but relief when the IVs were removed and the appointments cancelled. There was a certain freedom in surrender, he had discovered, a liberation that came from accepting the inevitable and ceasing to fight against it. But the body did not care about philosophical acceptance. The body continued its relentless decline, indifferent to the intellectual frameworks that Elias had constructed around it. He could argue that death was release, that non-existence was peace, that the cessation of consciousness was the ultimate liberation. And still his lungs would struggle for air, still his bones would ache with the cold, still his hands would tremble with the weakness that had crept into them like a thief in the night. He tried to get out of bed. The attempt was humiliating, a comedy of errors that would have been amusing if it had happened to someone else. His legs refused to support his weight, buckling beneath him like the struts of a collapsing bridge. He grabbed for the nightstand, missed, and found himself sprawled on the floor, his cheek pressed against the cold hardwood, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He lay there for a long time, staring at the space beneath his bed. Dust bunnies had accumulated in the corners, and he wondered idly when he had last cleaned, when he had last cared about the state of his surroundings. The dust was patient. The dust would outlast him. The dust would be here long after he was gone, settling on his books and his furniture and the remnants of his life. He thought about calling his sister. The phone was on the nightstand, just out of reach, and he could not summon the strength to crawl toward it. He thought about calling an ambulance, about the strange men who would come and lift him off the floor and carry him to a hospital where he would be poked and prodded and subjected to further indignities. He thought about the alternative, staying here, lying on the floor, waiting for death to find him. He chose the alternative. He chose the floor. He chose the dust. He chose the silence. The sun rose over the city, and he watched the light creep across the ceiling, watched the shadows retreat, watched the world begin its indifferent rotation. The apartment remained quiet. The phone remained silent. The dust remained patient. And Elias Thorne, the philosopher who had argued that life was suffering, that non-existence was peace, that the only ethical choice was to turn away from the world, lay on the floor of his apartment and realize that he was afraid to die. The fear was not what he had expected. He had written about death, had theorized about it, had consoled the dying with arguments that he had believed with all his heart. He had told them that death was release, that non-existence was peace, that the fear of oblivion was the natural response of a brain that had evolved to preserve itself but had no philosophical justification. He had told them these things, and he had believed them, and he had watched the dying close their eyes and slip away into whatever darkness awaited them. But lying on the floor, his body failing, his breath shallow, he understood that his theories had been nothing but words. Words were not comfort. Words were not peace. Words were not the warm hand of a loved one, the gentle pressure of fingers interlaced, the soft voice that whispered reassurances in the dark. He had none of that. He had his words, and his words were failing him. He thought about his grandmother, and the way she had held him after the sparrow died, the way her hands had been soft and warm against his back, the way she had let him cry without telling him to stop. He thought about his sister and the embrace she had given him at the airport, the way her body had pressed against his, the way she had refused to let go, even when he tried to pull away. He thought about the woman he had loved in graduate school, the one he had pushed away because he had been too afraid to let himself be loved. He thought about all of it, the connections he had refused, and the warmth he had denied himself, and he felt the magnitude of his loss pressing down on him like a physical weight. He had spent his life building walls, and now the walls were all he had. The walls were closing in on him, and he could not find a way out. He was discovered by the super, a gruff man named Mr. Kowalski, who had been called by Elias's sister when Elias failed to answer the phone for 3 consecutive days. The discovery was ignominious. Elias was still on the floor, still staring at the dust bunnies, still wearing the same clothes he had worn for a week. Mr. Kowalski took one look at him and called an ambulance, and Elias was carried out of his apartment on a stretcher, past the curious stares of his neighbors, past the judgmental gaze of the super, past the indifferent sky that stretched above the city like a vast and uncaring eye. The hospital was familiar. He had spent enough time in hospitals to recognize the rhythms, the rituals, the performances of care that were performed by overworked nurses and exhausted doctors. He was admitted to a room, prodded and examined, connected to machines that beeped and whirred, and measured the slow decline of his vital signs. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, their faces grave, their words careful and measured. They offered him comfort, medication, the illusion of control. He accepted the medication. He accepted the comfort. He accepted the illusion. Then his sister arrived. Clara burst into the room like a force of nature, her face flushed with anger and fear and a love so fierce it seemed to fill every corner of the sterile space. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took his hand, gripping it with a strength that surprised him, her fingers warm and solid against his cold, trembling flesh. "Elias," she said, and her voice was shaking. "What happened? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me you were getting worse?" He looked at her, at the familiar lines of her face, at the gray in her hair that had not been there the last time he had seen her, at the eyes that were so full of worry and grief, and the stubborn refusal to let him go. He looked at her, and he felt something crack inside him, something that had been frozen for so long he had forgotten it was there. "I couldn't," he said, and his voice was a whisper, the voice of a man who had been hollowed out by pain and loneliness. "I couldn't call you. I couldn't tell you. I didn't want you to see me like this." Clara shook her head, her grip tightening on his hand. "You don't get to do that," she said. "You don't get to push me away. You don't get to decide what I can handle. I'm your sister. I'm here, and I'm not leaving." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words would not come. He had spent his life arguing, had built his entire existence around the art of argument. But now, lying in a hospital bed with his sister's hand in his, he found that the arguments had deserted him. They had fled to some distant corner of his mind, leaving behind only the raw, naked truth of his fear. "I'm afraid," he said, and the admission cost him something he had not realized he still possessed. "I'm so afraid, Clara. I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving. I'm afraid of being alone." She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, her body warm against his, her voice soft in his ear. "You're not alone," she said. "You're not alone, Elias. I'm here. I'll always be here." He felt the tears come, slow and hot, coursing down his cheeks like a river that had been dammed for decades. He wept, and his sister held him, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to be held. She stayed with him for 3 days. She slept in the chair beside his bed, her body contorted into uncomfortable positions, her face pale with exhaustion. She ate the hospital food. She endured the 2 bright lights and the 2 loud noises. She answered the questions of the doctors and the nurses, and the endless parade of medical professionals who passed through his room. She did all of this without complaint, without resentment, without the slightest indication that she had anywhere else to be. "You need someone to take care of you," Clara said on the 3rd day. "You can't live alone anymore. You can't go back to that apartment and pretend that you're fine. You need help." Elias looked at her. The words were true, and he knew they were true. But the thought of leaving his apartment, of surrendering his independence, of accepting the vulnerability of dependence. It terrified him more than the cancer, more than the pain, more than the death that was waiting for him. "I don't want to be a burden," he said. "I don't want to impose on you. You have your own life. You have your own family. You don't need to." "Stop," she said, and there was an edge to her voice that brooked no argument. "You're not a burden. You're my brother. And I'm not going to let you die alone in that apartment. We're going to find you someone, a nurse, someone to help you at home. And I'm going to make sure you're not alone." He looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes, the stubborn refusal to let him go, and he felt something shift inside him. It was not acceptance exactly. It was not surrender. It was something smaller and more fragile. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The nurse arrived 3 days later. Her name was Marie. She was a large woman, broad-shouldered and solid, with gray hair cut short, and eyes that had seen everything and could not be surprised. She wore a practical outfit, comfortable shoes, loose-fitting pants, a blouse that had been washed so many times its color had faded to a soft, indeterminate gray. She carried a bag filled with supplies and an air of competence that was both reassuring and intimidating. "Dr. Thorne," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Marie. Your sister asked me to look after you. I hope that's all right." Elias took her hand. Her grip was firm, warm, not the fragile grip of a woman who was intimidated by his reputation or his arguments. She did not seem to care that he was a famous philosopher, that he had written books that had been translated into 14 languages, that he had changed the minds of thousands of people. She seemed to see him simply as a man who was dying, and who needed someone to help him get through the days that remained. "You don't have to call me Dr. Thorne," he said. "Elias is fine." She nodded, a small economical movement of her head. "Elias, then. I'll need to know about your routines, your medications, your preferences. I'll need to know what you can do for yourself and what you need help with. I'll need to know about your pain levels, your appetite, your sleep patterns. I'll need to know everything, because that's the only way I can help you." He nodded, a little dazed by her efficiency, her directness, her refusal to sugarcoat the situation. She was not like the doctors, who spoke in careful euphemisms and measured phrases. She was not like his sister, who wanted to protect him from the worst of it. She was simply present, simply there, simply doing the work that needed to be done. "I'll need to get to know you," he said, and the words came out more plaintively than he had intended. "I'll need to learn to trust you." She looked at him, and for the first time, a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "That's fair," she said. "Trust takes time. We'll work on it." The adjustment was difficult. Marie was in his apartment every morning at 7, letting herself in with the key his sister had given her, moving through his space with the quiet competence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She made his breakfast, prepared his medications, helped him shower and dress and perform the simple tasks that had become impossible. She did not flinch at his nakedness, at the scars and the bruises and the evidence of his body's slow decline. She treated him with a matter-of-fact kindness that was somehow more comforting than any show of sympathy. He resented her at first. He resented the intrusion, the loss of privacy, the surrender of his independence. He resented the way she moved through his apartment as though it were her own, rearranging his things, cleaning his clutter, imposing her order on his chaos. He resented the way she looked at him, not with pity or judgment, but with the simple recognition of a job that needed to be done. But the resentment faded slowly, replaced by something else, something that felt almost like gratitude. She did not argue with him. She did not try to convince him that his philosophy was wrong. She did not offer comfort or consolation or the false promises of hope that the doctors and the nurses were always offering. She simply did the work. She made the meals, dispensed the medications, helped him through the hours of pain and fear and exhaustion. She did these things without complaint, without fanfare, without the expectation of anything in return. And in the quiet moments, when the pain was manageable and the fear was distant, and the world was reduced to the small, familiar space of his apartment, she talked. She talked about her husband, who had died of a heart attack 10 years ago. She talked about her children, who had grown up and moved away, and now lived in distant cities with their own families. She talked about her grandchildren, the ones who had transformed her life, who had given her a reason to keep going after the grief had threatened to overwhelm her. "I was angry," she said one afternoon, her hands busy with a load of laundry. "When my husband died, I was so angry. I thought the world had betrayed me. I thought I would never be happy again. I thought there was no point in going on." Elias listened. He did not offer advice. He did not offer philosophy. He simply listened, the way his grandmother had listened to him, the way his sister had listened to him, the way no one had listened to him for years. Getting older, losing people, watching your body fail, it's not something you can prepare for, she said. It's not something you can reason your way through. It's something you have to live through. And the only way to live through it is to find the joy where you can, to hold on to the people who love you, to let yourself be held. He looked at her. She was folding a shirt, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She did not look at him. She did not expect a response. She was simply telling him the truth as she had lived it, the truth that had nothing to do with philosophy and everything to do with life. "I don't know how to do that," he said. "I don't know how to let myself be held." She stopped folding. She looked at him, her eyes soft, her face kind. "You're learning," she said. "You're learning. That's all any of us can do." The weeks passed. Marie became a fixture in his life, a constant presence that he had not known he needed. She was not warm exactly. She was not sentimental. She was not the kind of woman who offered easy comfort or easy answers. But she was solid. She was reliable. She was there in the small, unremarkable way that mattered most. And in her presence, Elias found himself changing. He found himself speaking more openly, sharing more honestly, letting down the walls he had built so carefully. He told her about his mother, about the sadness that had followed her like a shadow. He told her about his grandmother, about the kindness that had been her only consolation. He told her about his sister, about the love that had survived everything. He told her about the sparrow. He told her about the tiny, terrified eyes, and the way its chest had risen and fallen, quicker and quicker, until it stopped. He told her about the moment he had realized that the world was cruel, that suffering was inevitable, that the only honest response was to turn away. And she listened. She listened the way his grandmother had listened, the way his sister had listened, the way no one had listened for years. "You were just a boy," she said when he finished. "You were just a boy, and you saw something terrible. And you built your whole life around that one moment. You built your whole philosophy around that one moment. And you forgot that there were other moments. You forgot that there was joy." He looked at her. She was sitting in the chair beside his bed, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm and kind. She was not judging him. She was not pitying him. She was simply telling him the truth as she saw it, the truth that had nothing to do with philosophy and everything to do with life. "You're right," he said. I forgot that there was joy." She nodded. "It's not too late," she said. "It's never too late. You can still find it. You can still let yourself be held." He did not know if she was right. He did not know if it was possible to find joy in the final days of a life that had been defined by its absence. He did not know if he could let himself be held, if he could let down the walls that had protected him for so long. But he knew that he wanted to try. He knew that he wanted to find the joy, to let himself be held, to embrace the life that was slipping away from him. He knew that he wanted to do all the things he had spent his life refusing to do. He did not know if he would succeed. He did not know if he would find the joy. He did not know if he would ever be able to let himself be held. But he knew that he had to try. He knew that trying was the only thing that mattered. He knew that trying was the only thing that was real. And so he tried. He tried to find the joy. He tried to let himself be held. He tried to embrace the life that was slipping away from him. He tried, and in the trying, he found something that he had not expected. He found peace.